Okay, one of the most difficult things that a barbecue chef can cook is brisket. We get a lot of people that tell us, why does my brisket never turn out? Why is it always tough? Why is it always dry? Well, some of it's the way you're cooking it. Some of it is the type of meat you pick. You know, a lot of it is just learning and practicing and using a few basic techniques that we're going to show you to help make your brisket a little bit more tender and really good flavor. So if you go to your butcher or you go to your market and ask them if they have a full packer cut brisket, this is what you're going to get. It has two parts to it. There's the flat portion, which is this part right here. Typically when you get slices of brisket, that's where it's going to come from. Then the back part of here is called the point, or sometimes called the decal. And you'll hear of a product called burnt ends, which are absolutely fantastic. They're like little nuggets of brisket candy. But the first thing you want to do is you'll notice how much fat is on this brisket. So what we're going to want to do is trim a lot of that fat off. You don't need a huge knife, but you do need one that's relatively sharp. And you'll get better at this. Don't worry about if it's not even. A lot of people will tell you, oh, he's cutting off all the flavor. Trust me, when there's about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch of fat on here, we're going to cook a pretty lean brisket. And people will tell you, well, he's taking off everything that's going to keep it moist, all the flavor. We're going to leave about a 1/4 inch of fat. And regardless of what anybody tells you, the science and the physics of it will tell you that fat is not going to melt and suck down through that brisket. It's just not going to do it. But I promise you, leaving a quarter inch of fat is plenty to give you the flavor that you want. And you don't want to end up putting your rub and your flavor on a product that you're not going to eat, that you're just going to throw away. If that fat is a softer type of fat, it's more apt to probably melt away than that really hard, tough fat like this right here. You can have your butcher do this if you're not comfortable with it. Always make friends with a good butcher. He'll save you. Usually you'll see it's a lot leaner over here and not as much fat, but there is a really hard piece of fat that is not going to render out when you cook it. And we want to remove that. It's right on that point. As you peel it up, you're going to see we're going to take most of that fat out in just one piece. This is something that nobody's ever going to eat. It's just going to go in the trash, and in the trash with it will be a lot of your flavor and a lot of your seasonings. Okay. Okay, a lot of times you go to the grocery store and they won't have a full cut packer brisket, but they'll have briskets. They're smaller, they're trimmed out. We're cooking one of those today as well. It primarily is the flat, which is that portion of the brisket. And it's important to notice which way the grain is running, because when you cut this brisket after it's cooked, you're always going to want to cut against the grain. That's another reason that sometimes it's a little bit more tough, is people cut it in the wrong direction. And the way those fibers are, you want to cut against the grain so you're going to get the most tender possible chew. Now what you can do is, there's a lot of ways you can season your brisket. Some people just like to be simple: salt, pepper, a little bit of garlic, maybe some cayenne. Other people will use just a standard barbecue rub. One of the things that we like to do in addition to a rub is we like to inject. And there are a lot of injections that you can get out there. A lot of them are sold on the internet. If you go to a barbecue competition, almost every team is going to inject their barbecue with something. This has a mixture of different phosphates, different flavors that are going to enhance the beef flavor, and kind of an insurance policy. Again, it's going to keep it from drying out. It's going to be a little bit moist and have a much more beefy brisket flavor. And when you're doing a brisket that's different than pork butt, kind of a checkerboard pattern, just little pockets. And this is just it's gonna add flavor when you put your rub on, when you cook it, and keep it a lot more moist. So we've got our pan here. Gonna put it in, and we're just gonna apply a standard barbecue seasoning that we have. It's kind of a good all-purpose one. A lot of times we will do something with just salt, pepper, and garlic. This time we're just going to try this one with just our standard barbecue rub. We like this one because it's got a good amount of paprika, and it gives a good golden brown color when it's cooking. And again, this is a thick cut of meat, so it's kind of hard to use too much. Okay, we're ready to put our brisket on the grill. Here's the big argument: fat side up, fat side down. And there's going to be like about 1,000 comments down below who say you don't know what you're talking about. Well, we've cooked it both ways. It's turned out both ways really good. So a lot of it depends on the type of cooker you have. This one is going on a rotisserie cooker, which you can see here. And for that purposes, we're going to cook it fat side up. A lot of times people will be cooking on a Weber bullet, a big green egg, Weber kettle. Anything that you can control the heat on, you can cook on it. Where you've got the fire directly underneath it as a heat source, a lot of times you'll cook it fat side down to try to protect it. And again, it's always important to remember, and it's why we've cooked a lean brisket. That brisket is going to stick to that grate a little bit. So one of the reasons fat side down works for a lot of people, especially in a higher heat environment, is when you take that off, sometimes you do get some of the product that is stuck to the grate. Fat side down allows that to be mostly the fat. So we're going to cook this one fat side up. We're going to cook it right there. We'll come back and test it, and we'll be ready to go after about 4 or 5 hours after that rub is set. We're going to come back and spray it down either with a little beef broth or a little apple juice. It's not going to hurt it any, just to keep it kind of moist. And then we'll come back and wrap it after it hits about 165 internal, which will be about after 8 to 10 hours. Okay, our brisket's been on for about, we're cooking a flat. One of the flats has been on about 4 and 5 hours, so we're going to wrap it. As we've mentioned before, a lot of people call wrapping a brisket the Texas crutch. We call it just making it tender and a little bit more flavorful. So let's go ahead and get that process done. Pretty easy, just put it on some foil and then position it and wrap it tightly. And when you wrap your meat, always do it seams up, because if any juices are floating around in there, that way they're always going to stay contained in your little pouch that you have. So we're going to set this right here on the smoker, and we'll come back and let that cook for about another hour or two, and we'll be ready to go. Okay, we've cooked our brisket. It's been about 14 hours since we originally put it on the grill, on the smoker. The internal temperature was about 195 when we took it off. We took it off and we put it in our dry cooler to rest. It's been resting another couple hours in there. When it rests, all those juices just to absorb back into the meat, for everything to just kind of calm down, and now we're ready to cut it. Well, one thing we're going to do is you can follow the natural contour and separate those 2 points. We're going to put this right over here for now, just let it sit, because we're going to focus on the flat part, which is what we're going to make our slices out of. So remember what we talked about. One of the reasons people have a very tough brisket or a dry brisket is a lot of times the way they cut it. If you can see really close, you can see the grain of this meat runs this way. Anytime you cut any meat, especially a brisket, you want to cut it against the grain. That's going to shorten those fibers, going to make the meat more tender. There's always a little hard part here. I always like to cut that hard part off. And you notice there's our smoke ring. So we've got some good smoke in it. And again, I like to cut it about the thickness of a pencil. You can cut it as thick as you want it, but typically what you'll do against the grain, cut it about the thickness of a pencil. And again, this has good stability. It's holding together, it's not falling apart. And one of the things you want to look at to know whether you've cooked it right is when we pull this apart, it should pull and separate just like that. just like that. And you can take it, take a little bite of it. Perfectly tender, has a great feel in your mouth, a great beef flavor, just like brisket that is perfectly cooked should taste. It's not dry, it's juicy, everything is perfect. Your guests are gonna love you. Okay, that other part of that brisket that we talked about that is just absolutely one of my favorites is the point. There's a different feel for this meat. And again, before when we cut with the grain, this is something we're gonna cube, so it's not as critical. If you see any loose pieces of fat or whatever, you can trim those off. But what I like to do is just cut them in about 3/4 inch cubes. Just like that. All the way down. Now this part of the brisket, if you remember from when we were trimming it, is a little fattier. But some of that fat has gotten melted away. That's inside there. Once you get up to about 195 degrees, there's a chemical reaction in that collagen and those fibers start breaking down. And again, let's say you put these, you can roll, we're just gonna roll these in some juice left over from the brisket. Again, you can sauce them, but we're gonna take one. If you don't at least try this, you're doing a mistake. This is the perfect meat. You can just sit. If you want to make chopped beef sandwiches, and I always do a rough chop.